Chapter 15, Desara Lore. The nightmares had come frequent enough that Talanji could recognize them for the falsehood they were. Recognizing them was different from escaping them. Still, as venom dripped from fangs as thick and white as river beast tusks, the first corrosive splash landed on Talanji's shoulder. She screamed, helpless to protect herself as the spider hovered over her, jaws descending, razor sharp, so close. Thrashing, kicking, twisting, nothing helped, no hope. The creature in Shadra's own image pinned Talanji to her bed, its 8 legs trapping her like a living prison. Its abdomen heaved, silk threads filling the chamber, the threads that would form a deadly cocoon and Talanji's mausoleum. The giant spider opened its dripping mouth wide, and Talanji cried out once more. Inside, struggling to get out, she saw the face of Bezime, the inconsolable father who had come to beg for a queen's lenience so that a young marriage might blossom. But the widow's bite had taken him from the palace during one of their raids on the city, Talanji's patrols finding Bezime's corpse at the edge of Nazmir, charred almost beyond recognition. The troll clawed at the spider's insides, desperate to get out. "Help me! My queen! My queen, help me!" "I cannot!" Talanji thrashed harder. If this was the end, if she was to be visited by all of her failures, then she would not simply lie still and die without a fight. One name might save her. One cry for aid might actually banish the nightmare. Tears streamed down Bezime's frantic face, and then his skin began to blister and burn, his pleas buried in the spider's thorax as the beast clamped its jaws shut and lunged for Talanji. "Bwansamdi!" The image of Shadra stilled, then broke apart, fragmenting into puffs of blue smoke that gradually faded, rising to the ceiling like candle smoke. Just another dream, another nightmare. It didn't matter. Talanji gasped for breath, leaping out of bed and grabbing up the blanket, wrapping it around herself while she wiped at her very real sweat on her brow. As she pulled her hand away from her forehead, she saw deep lines carved into it, wrinkles that had not been there the day before. How could that be? Was ruling leeching the life out of her so quickly? "Ya called?" She exhaled and sat back down on the edge of her bed, knowing Bwansamdi waited just on the other side of the immense golden platform. A merciful breeze, humid yet cool, blew in from the open balcony window. Talanji turned her face toward it, greedy for the relief it brought. It was only a nightmare," she said. "Shadra wanted me dead, and the poor father they stole from the palace was inside her. It felt so real." "Because ya guilt is real." Bwansamdi appeared before her, the azure fire eyes behind his mask glowing dimly. "Take a look outside, my queen. Ya nightmare is not over. Something must be done, and soon." Talanji hissed, clutching the blanket to her chest, and padding on bare feet to the balcony's edge. She tried not to look at her visibly withered hands. The law of graves spoke true. Fires burned bright in the jungles below, 8 pinpoints of light in the darkness. Either she was still emerging from sleep, or Bwansamdi appeared shaky, translucent, as if he were only half present. "How is this possible?" Talanji bit down hard on her lip, a rage building inside that would soon spill out or consume her. My soldiers patrol the jungle tirelessly, yet somehow they slip by. They raid my city, attack my palace, attack me. How did they grow so strong, so quickly? Bwonsamdi floated beside her, surveying the work of the widow's bite. Talanji had not been idle, meeting with her council each day to discuss new approaches, new tactics. They had the superior force and superior resources, but their own land worked against them. The widow's bite could use the jungle to stay hidden, their scattered numbers an advantage against an army spread thin by the size of Zuldazar. And many even in the city she knew remained suspicious of her rule. Those sympathetic ears might become sympathetic mouths, spreading the lies and terror of the group, eating away at the stability of Talanji's rule. "What do we do?" Talanji murmured. "How do I stop what I cannot see? They have no fortress, not even camps. By the time my guards find them, they are already gone. We are chasing vapor, fighting fires that are already smoldering coals." "They attack you because of the pact your father made," Bwonsamdi told her, waving his hand toward the chaos below. "They think I control ya, and they fear what my queen, a queen of death, might become." Talanji glared. "I am not your queen." "Tell them that," he gave a dark laugh. "They be burning my shrines, breaking the magic that protects them, killing my priests where they stand. If they burn many more, I won't be much help to ya. Aloha is nothing without believers and prayers." "It's harming you," Talanji gasped. "You're growing weaker." The Loa nodded gravely. "And you." "Me?" She collapsed back against the balcony wall, hopelessly frustrated, holding up her hands to the light of the braziers, and forced herself to look at them. My hands. What is happening to me, Bwonsamdi?" "We share a bond, little queen," he sighed. "We share a fate. If I have no followers, if there is no tribute and no faith, then I will be all but gone. My strength weakens, and tethered together, yours weakens with it." Talanji swore, stuffing her hands under the blanket to hide them. "Then these shivers, this pain in my chest." "It will get worse, Talanji, unless ya protect me. Ya must protect me." She heard the true fear in his voice, and wondered how she was to stand tall and courageous when even a god was afraid. I cannot accept this." "Accept it or not." Bwonsamdi bowed his head, the flames in his eyes even dimmer. "It is the truth." Talanji inhaled shakily. "If true, then how do I fight these rebels? Can you not help me?" The Loa chuckled, but it was utterly mirthless. "Ya have the soldiers, Talanji, and ya could have many, many more. I think ya already know how to fight the rebels." The Horde, of course. That Ambassador Zakan wouldn't stop pressing her to return to Orgrimmar and accept a place on the new Horde Council. A position that would give her what, exactly? She needed troops and ships, not empty promises. But her stubbornness wouldn't put out fires, and the Zanchuli Council had offered no solutions, just repeated concerns. It was up to her. It was always up to her, and now her life was on the line.
I will never accept peace with the Alliance, she said, stony. But I will ask for the Horde's help. This is growing beyond us.
Good. Bwonsamdi grinned at that. An attack against me is an attack against you. If they destroy us both, who will protect Zandalar? Talanji narrowed her eyes, suspicious of that grin.
This is no small thing that you want from me. The Horde is working with the witch that killed my father. The Horde is content to ignore the crimes of Jaina Proudmoore, but I never will be. So if you get what you want, Loa, I will not go empty-handed.
Empty-handed? Bwonsamdi cackled at her, an unkind sneer twisting his mouth. Ya get a kingdom, and ya life. I'd say that's more than fair.
And I am rid of this bond between us, Bwonsamdi. Rasta Khan's deal. I want it no longer. And if I am to abandon my pride to the Horde, then you will abandon this pact. My life is my own, tied to no others.
Talanji felt her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't often she gave an ultimatum to a Loa. And from the grimace on Bwonsamdi's face, he clearly disapproved. But she did not back down from the Loa of death. If he needed her so badly, then he could compromise. It was only fair. It was time at last for her to be making the deals. I don't think so, little queen.
Why? It cannot be undone, our pact? She asked. Will it kill me to break it?
No, Talanji, but ya would regret it. Ya have the law of graves on your side, the loyalty of a god. Did ya really think there would be no drawbacks? The breeze whistled between them, then a crackle as the flames spreading through the jungle claimed a stand of trees and set them toppling over. Screams punctuated the night. The room behind her grew frosty and fogged, a blast of energy sending her toppling against the bed as Bwonsamdi mustered what little strength he had, thundering, "Foolish girl! Nothing to say!" Talanji whirled to face him. She did not cower. She did not speak. Let him throw his tantrum. The high ground was hers to keep. "Reckless child of a reckless king! Consider yourself lucky you be working with me, and not another Loa!" Bwonsamdi spat. In his rage he had expanded to fill the room, his hair brushing the ceiling. Then he diminished, his eyes once again dimmer and less blue. Mwezala would eat ya alive. Even the mention of the other Loa's name made Bwonsamdi's image waver and blur.
I would tell him the same thing,
Talanji stated, defiant. She might have only been a young troll in a bedsheet without crown, without jewels, without a weapon, but she was still the queen. Ya will regret this, Bwonsamdi assured her, shrinking further. Consider the deal struck, girl. Protect my shrines, keep us safe, and when I am strong again, our pact will be no more. Ya will have your life back, all your own. But ya may not like what it means to be all alone. Chapter 16, Dazara Lore. Zakan hopped lightly from foot to foot, waiting for his moment to speak. The Zanchuli Council had put him down on their schedule, an emergency meeting called at dawn to address the growing threat of the Widow's Bite. He had never before presented officially in front of a crowd of important strangers, and the pressure squeezed him from every direction. The answer, he felt, was plain. Talanji needed help from the Horde. The Horde wanted to give it, and she simply had to be convinced that her personal vendettas mattered less than the safety and security of Zandalar. However, the likelihood of swaying her to his point of view seemed less and less as she paced before the council in their lofty golden chairs, her voice clear and decisive, the council nodding in agreement with nearly every word.
The widow's bite would have us believe that they are everywhere and nowhere, Talanji was saying. But this is not true. They have made a mistake. Now we know what they want. They want to weaken Bonsamdi because they believe it will weaken me.
Servants in glittering headdresses and feathered skirts took vigorous notes behind the council members, scribbling frantically on tablets, while Talanji continued her speech to the silent, enthralled audience.
They will continue to target places of Bonsamdi's power, his shrines, of course, and more importantly, the necropolis. It must not fall. But knowing where the rebels will strike means we can put a stop to this now.
She stilled, facing her council with her head held high.
We protect the shrines. We protect the necropolis, and the widow's bite will be forced into open conflict.
Zakan began to applaud, moved, but realized he was alone in doing so. Not only that, he was not there to support her plan, not really. He needed her to ally with the Horde. That was the primary reason Thrall had sent Zakan in the first place. He cleared his throat and slipped further into the shadows behind the pillars of the great council chamber. The chieftain of the Darkspear tribe had arrived just hours before dawn, alarmed by what he had read in Zakan's messages. A brutal storm had begun to rage off the coast, the way unpassable by sea, air the only available route. Even that was dangerous. One of Gazlo's flying machines had been able to safely drop him off in the harbor, but only just, damaged by the electricity brewing in the clouds, crashing offshore the moment Rokan set foot on dry land. Zakan had greeted his arrival with relief, thrilled to have support from not only a member of the Horde Council itself, but a close friend of the Queen's. Chieftain Rokan stood, blood-red tabard and leather armor, a stark contrast to the blue and purple and gold-clad council members.
I agree with your assessment, Queen Talanji, he said. But we best send those patrols now. Sentiment in the city is not good, your majesty. These attacks make you look incompetent and weak.
To her credit, Talanji did not flinch. War Druid Loti, enameled armor blazing under the brazier hanging above the council, stood and grunted her agreement.
The rebel threat ends today.
Then let the force be assembled, Natal Hakata, blue-haired and golden-tusked, roared. The necropolis is vast, with many tunnels where little spiders might hide. It will take a great deal of resources to secure it. It was time to step in. Zakan wasn't on the schedule until after Zolani was slated to speak, but he knew this was his one opportunity to intervene, before their enthusiasm and certainty grew too powerful to overcome. He not only had a duty to the Horde to represent their interests, but the Loa of Graves himself had bid him change Talanji's mind. No pressure whatsoever now. Ancestors protect me.
If I may...
Zakan swore he heard a parrot flap its wings 6 miles away in the abrupt, chilling silence. He tiptoed around the pillar concealing him, and stood in Talanji's shadow, her arms crossed expectantly. Ah, Zakan, come forward, boy. What do you have to say? Rokan gestured him forward. Let us hear from our Horde ambassador. Do we really have time for this? Natal Hakata muttered.
I can be brief.
Zakan hurried to the center of the great chamber. It reminded him of the grandeur of Gromash Hold. How many great decisions had been made there? How many executions decided? How many wars declared? Just a jungle boy from the shores of the Echo Isles. Varrock Sorfang had told him to see war differently, to see it as the preventable horror it truly was. Zakan made a fist, holding that thought in his hand like a talisman. What he said next might save the lives of many Zandalari warriors, and further on down, it might save lives in the Horde if Talanji were to join her strength to theirs. Speak, boy, Natal Hakata demanded, impatient.
Don't send your soldiers to the necropolis,
Zakan blurted. Bad start. He winced and tried again, this time slower.
The Queen is right. Bonsandi must be protected, and all the people of Zandalar too, but you can't do it alone. This is a Zandalari problem.
Talanji stalked up to him, nearly butting against his tusks.
I am not unreasonable. I can bend. The Horde may send their troops, if and when they agree to lend me those same troops against the Proudmoors.
Oh, no, they would never agree to that, Zakan countered.
And what then? Your people think you're weak now. What would they think when you can't protect your own shrines and temples from a band of rebels?
Rumbling from the council. Interest from the council. Zakan pushed on, sensing his moment.
You will get one chance to write the ending of this story. So far, your people have only witnessed defeat. Can you stand to show them one more? Why take that chance? The Horde is willing to stand with you. With their help, with their strength, we can write that ending. A victorious ending, right now.
Talanji looked ready to throttle him, but she kept her temper, her chest rising and falling faster and faster.
This is propaganda.
The boy has a point. Rokan stroked his chin thoughtfully. The only propaganda I be seeing is what the widow's bite spreads against us, my queen. That tide is turning, and without a decisive victory, the rebels could raise the whole city against you.
If the queen's rule is truly threatened,
the Tortolan, Lashk, spoke up, head craning farther out of his shell,
then inviting the Horde forces back here could be a mistake. I mean no insult to you, Rokan, but what if your generals see an opportunity to invade?
Lashk speaks wisdom,
Talanji nodded, reiterating.
There are already rumors of such in the city. If the Horde is to come, then we must have certain promises in return. Justice for our city. Revenge for the Alliance siege.
These rumors. Standing, the chieftain Rokan stepped down from the raised platform where the council members sat. He regarded first Talanji, and then Zakan, his voice low with weariness. I have my doubts about these rebels. They be too fast, too smart. Maybe Aloha be helping them. Or maybe something else. Zakan blinked.
Like what?
I don't know yet, boy, but I intend to find out. Rokan pushed by them both, separating them, leaving the council chambers with slow, deliberate steps. On his belt, his red dagger flashed with cunning magic. Ya won't have my support either way until we know more, Queen Talanji. The ambassador here be right. We only get one chance. Talanji went after him, and then the others, arguments erupting between the council as they adjourned without any official call to do so. Everyone and everything was in an uproar. Zakan stared, speechless, buffeted this way and that by the leaving council, trying to drop a word in on conversations he was not welcome to join. Before he could think of something that might keep them all there, the chamber was empty, even the note-taking pages fleeing. Scratching his head, Zakan tried to piece together what had just happened. He had persuaded some of the members, at least a little, but Talanji remained impossible to reach. And here he thought she was growing more sympathetic to the Horde. What would it take? What would make her see that she need not stand alone? "Thanks for listening," Zakan called after the long-gone council. "I think—" "Oh, they heard ya, boy. They heard ya. And ya did well." The voice wrapped around him like a vise, wringing all the joy and lightness out of his body before he could breathe again. Bwansamdi. The Loa had come to visit, his unsettling masked presence somehow weaker, as if he was stretched thin, a well running dry. "I didn't do well." Zakan slumped his way to the platform, sitting on the edge of it, just below where the council chairs gleamed with hammered gold and jewels. "Talanji won't trust me. She won't trust the Horde, and we're running out of time." Bwansamdi floated down to meet him, sitting to his right, his bones and armor rattling as he descended. His presence cast a shadow over everything. Even the sun outside lost some of its heat and shine. Still, his image was thin, worryingly so, like linen breeches almost worn through. "Ya new at this, don't be so hard on yourself, boy. Some of the council be listening to ya, and that's no small feat. They see something powerful in you. They see what I see." At that, Zakan straightened. A Loa, a god, thought he was doing a good job? That he was powerful? It didn't seem real. But no, he had heard the words, and he felt them lift his sinking spirits. What had he done to find his way into the presence of so many influential beings? Maybe Bwansamdi was right. Maybe he truly was powerful. Ancestors, you never let me down. "And what do they see?" Zakan chuckled. "Besides a failure?" "Someone they want on their side." Zakan jumped up and straightened the Horde colors draped over his shoulder. "You're right. The council did listen. And if they can listen to me, then so can the Queen. I can't give up." He felt the Loa walk in stride with him toward the wide open archway that showed the carpet of green jungle blanketing Zandalar. The fires had gone out, but the smoke still rose in pillars of dire warning. The Loa walked in step with him. Zakan closed his hand into a fist again, holding on to that moment, holding on to the faith and trust of a god. "Don't give up, boy." Bwansamdi's amused chuckle filled the chamber, but there was a note of sadness to it that only strengthened Zakan's resolve. The Loa needed protecting, and Zakan would see it done. "Don't give up." The Loa's words drifted down to him as Bwansamdi gradually disappeared, nothing but his blue flame eyes remaining in the blinding light of dawn. "That's the spirit." Chapter 17. Nazmir. The sound of a flute infiltrated the captain's quarters, made thin and muted by the layers of timber separating Matthias Shaw from the crew below deck. Across from him, down the considerable length of a well-used and lacquered table, Flynn Fairwind tapped his foot to the music, boot bouncing as he sang along under his breath. "You can go join them, you know," Matthias pointed out, studying him over the edge of his book. It was a history of Zandalar, old and somewhat out of date. Dry stuff. His companion, however, seemed more inclined to cozy up to his bottle. Flynn shrugged. A chandelier of lanterns rocked back and forth, sending light skittering across the table toward the pirate. Crew has less fun when captain chaperones. They need time to relax and just be themselves. Don't you need that also? Matthias asked, cocking a brow. Everyone does, Flynn nodded to the water-damaged book he held. Except you. Do you ever stop working? Not really. Flynn snorted. See? Fine. Matthias closed the book and placed it on the table, then stretched his stiff arms over his head, groaning a little. I stopped working. What now? You're hopeless. The pirate chuckled, and rolled his eyes, but swiveled and managed to put down the bottle for a moment. What shall we discuss? This was your idea, Matthias replied. Sometimes on the bold Arva, when the sailing was smooth and the work of the day done, the crew would all sit around telling tales and singing, but Matthias kept to the captain's quarters. Flynn often joined him, ever inebriated, but most nights he would just sip to keep his end of the conversation flowing. At first, the constant company annoyed Matthias, but gradually, as he was prone to do, he built a profile of the strange and fascinating Flynn Fairwind. He wondered if he would ever truly understand Fairwind, who seemed to him a man haunted, smiling and laughing to distract from something else. Maybe he didn't need to understand him, though the desire to remained constant. It was simply in Shaw's nature to try and scrape away the facade and see what lay beneath, and that skill, that obsession, made him good at his job. My mother was a thief, you know, Fairwind blurted out then, unprompted. The ship creaked around them, a sailor's lullaby, rocking them just like a doting mother might do. Maybe that was what made Fairwind say it. I did not know, Matthias responded. Sensing this was going to be a long talk, he stood and fetched himself a rare tumbler of wine from the cabinet behind him. She was, Fairwind sighed and shook his head, raking both hands through his long golden-brown hair, then fussing with the ribbon tying it back. Always insisted she was a barmaid, but one night I hid under the bed in our cottage and waited for her. She must have thought I was out back playing, but no, I was watching. Matthias couldn't help but lean forward a little, interested. Flynn smirked. I could only see the hem of her skirt and her shoes, worn through to the soles of her feet. She went to a loose brick by the hearth and pried it up, then stuffed a few necklaces and brooches in there. Did she catch you? Oh, no. He shook his head. I waited until she went back out looking for me, and popped up, crawled out the window, and scrambled around in a bush to make it seem like I'd been out there all along. For a while I was, I don't know, angry or sad because I wanted her to trust me. But then I realized any mother willing to do that for her son, risk her life and her liberty, must be full of love. And bravery, Matthias told him softly. At that, Flynn snorted, looking at him askew. Says the man working for the crown. You work for it now, too. Blimey, you're right. Flynn reached for the bottle, chugging liberally. It was Matthias's turn to smirk. So, where is she now, your mother? Flynn made a clicking sound with his cheek and stared at the bottle for a long moment. She's dead. Hanged for being a thief. I think that was the day I stopped being a stupid little boy. I made myself go and watch. I remember being so small I could barely see anything in the crowd. He laughed bitterly at the memory, then gazed out the curved windows that showed the darkened sea. He kicked his feet up on the table, boots scuffed and salt-stained. I remember the sound most of all. Everyone but me knew when it was coming. And then there was a breathe in. Everyone all together, and then... He squeezed his eyes shut, and Matthias held his wine midway between mouth and table, transfixed. And then... a crunch, like a hammer striking wet gravel. I thought I would hear her scream or cry out for me, but no, just the breathe in and then the end. Matthias flinched and put down his wine, then turned the tumbler a few times. No little boy should know that sound. You've heard it before, I gather? Yes, many times. And does it always make you feel sick? Fairwind asked. Always. Matthias knew they had both killed the conversation, even if unwittingly, but he didn't want it to end. My grandmother was a thief, too. Fairwind choked up a mouthful of rum. Pardon? He should have heard the footsteps coming, but Fairwind had distracted him. There was a frantic pounding on the door. Captain! Captain! No sooner had both men leaped to their feet than the bold Arva listed precariously, sending book and tumbler and bottle and men careening toward the liquor cabinet. Flynn wasn't sober enough to keep his balance, arms flying out as he went along with the rest of the items not nailed down, and crashed into Matthias. The spymaster caught him by the shoulders. Thanks, Flynn muttered, not moving away. Sounds like trouble. Matthias had never observed the other man from this distance. He hadn't noticed that Flynn smelled as strongly of salt and soap as he did of whiskey, and the combination was intoxicating. His leather coat was warm to the touch, holding lingering sunlight and body heat. Yeah, Shaw blinked rapidly, finally taking a step back. Trouble. Captain! The door burst open and Flynn tumbled toward the intrusion. On deck, sir, now! You need to see this! New plan! Flynn Fairwind could only hope his crew could hear him above the war drums of thunder booming across the sky. We land, and we land fast! If we can land at all. Oh, please let there be land out there somewhere! He couldn't remember what it felt like to be dry. Good fortune had followed them for less than a full day. Choppy seas were a welcome change from the last storm, but now they faced another wall of rising, deadly waves. Ordinarily, he would blame the drinking for his confusion, but even a sober man would know that these storms were unnatural. Rain poured down less like a squall, and more like bucket after bucket being dumped directly on his head. The winds tore at their sails viciously, blowing in random directions that defied even the most skilled sailor's steering ability. Melly! Melly, if you're still aboard and alive, get us to shore! Flynn crashed across the main deck, using any spare piece of rigging or barrel or railing to reach the stern, where he hoped to find their tide sage and their only hope of surviving the storm. The shearing wind caught any voice and carried it away. A seagull whipped by his head, rocketing out to the sea behind him like a squawking cannonball. He flattened his hand above his eyes, but it was pointless. There was nothing to see but a solid sheet of rain and darkness. A door, finally. He threw himself toward the quarterdeck, the stairs leading upward, providing a railing to which he clung desperately. The door behind him banged open, the gale catching it and slamming it hard enough to scatter splinters across the floor. Shaw! The spymaster emerged, already shouting something, a black sodden cloak pulled up over his head. He yelled again, but the sound was lost. They were almost nose to nose, but it was bloody impossible to make out a single word. What? Flynn grabbed him by the shoulders. I can't read lips! What are you saying? The wind changed direction suddenly, flipping the sails the other way with a clap, leaving a brief swirling vortex of quiet. Land! A warning? A jubilation? Flynn felt the bold Arva lurch and heard the ear-rending crunch no captain ever wanted to hear. The hull had made contact, rowdy contact with a sandbar, though it appeared to be intact. He and Shaw hit the boards and slid, luckily into the quarterdeck. Unluckily, an instant later the rest of the crew appeared, tumbling toward them, until Flynn, Shaw, and a half-dozen bedraggled limp sailors lay in a groaning heap, piled at the bottom of the quarterdeck stairs.
Land,
Naylor wheezed, wedged under the bulk of a Kultiran gunner.
We noticed.
Flynn pushed at random hands and legs, dislodging himself from the human ball of yarn. He crawled slowly to his feet, wobbly, squinting into the heavy fog that dissipated with landfall. The storm moved off, suspiciously responsive, rain and gusts and threatening clouds retreating farther out to sea, leaving them in the stagnant, tropical sludge the Zandalari called air. Gradually, the crew reassembled behind Flynn. Melly stumbled down from the stern castle, dazed and wide-eyed.
Melly, you're fired. Wait, no. We still need a way off this damn island. You're back on the crew.
He narrowed his eyes.
For now.
Flynn sighed and wiped a piece of seaweed off his shoulder. Matthias Shaw joined him at the edge of the ship.
That storm was chasing us specifically, he rumbled.
I'm no expert, Shaw.
Flynn tossed him a weary smile.
But I think it's safe to assume we're not dealing with ordinary weather phenomena. If we don't find a way to stop whatever magic is causing this, we'll be stuck here forever.
That won't happen, Shaw assured him. Let's get to shore, have a look around, and make camp if there's a secluded spot.
What about the footholds you lot put down here? Fort Victory and the rest?
Abandoned. Once the armistice was signed, we ceded control of those encampments.
With no need for a rowboat to take them in, Shaw simply swung himself over the railing and began climbing a rogue rope down the hull.
Any sign of us here will be taken as an act of aggression.
Oh, brilliant! Then I'm glad we shipwrecked with such cat-like subtlety.
Flynn rolled his eyes, motioning to the crew.
Don't get cozy, just bring enough for a meal and protection. Then we find a place to lay anchor and hide the Arva.
It was probably wiser to stay aboard altogether, but he could read the faces of the men and women serving under him. They were tired, morale was low, and a brief stint on land always did a sailor good. Shaw had already begun snooping around on the sand, consulting a rain-drenched map and a compass.
Marshlands to the north, river to the west,
the spymaster said, tapping the map. Flynn nodded, surveying in every direction, grateful to finally be free of the obscuring mass of the storm. A pair of spiny diametrodons observed them a little ways inland, chewing their grass with blasé disinterest. Green mountains rose sharply behind the beasts, and farther down the beach, the pointed tops of huts emerged from the mist.
There's a village to the south, Flynn told him.
That must be Zebahari. Blast! We should be much deeper into Nazmir. I wanted to avoid veering this close to the Troll City.
Well, pardon me.
Flynn stomped off toward the remnants of a campfire.
I thought we had until the White Lady was full to get there. Silly me.
Don't get defensive. We don't have far to sail. Once the crew is back on their feet, we can follow the shore north and stay close to land to avoid the storms.
The blackened timbers thrown on the old fire still smoldered, and a trail of footsteps in the sand led away from it. At least 3 sets of prints, and fresh enough to be marked deep into the wet ground. Without another word, the spymaster inspected the prints, following them. A high, short whistle came from behind them. Flynn glanced over his shoulder to find the crew hadn't managed to unload a single thing from the bold Arva. Instead, Naylor hung over the railing, a looking-glass dangling from one hand, pointing toward the wall of dense jungle trees, where the owners of those footprints watched in a crouch from the shadows. "Shaw, look lively!" Flynn pulled his blunderbuss at once and aimed, but the powder was useless, soaked by the storm. It would have to be the cutlass then. Drawing his sword, he charged after the trolls, peering at them from the forest. Shaw calmly stuck his arm out to the side, keeping Flynn from racing into the jungle. "They've spotted us," Flynn hissed. "What are you waiting for?"
"Spilling blood will only cause more attention. They aren't dressed in the royal colors," Shaw explained, keeping Flynn at bay. "They're moving off, probably just foragers."
But the spy master frowned, brow pulled down tight.
"White and black,"
he heard Shaw murmur to himself. Flynn lowered his cutlass but did not sheath it. "What about it?"
"Just strange. Did you get a look at their garb? It was white and black with some sort of design on it."
This was Shaw's mission, and he didn't seem overly bothered by the onlookers, so Flynn determined he should not be too bothered either. Besides, the crew was apparently keeping a good lookout from the ship. "Lots of eyes and legs," Flynn said, wandering away and back toward the campfire. "Almost like a spider."
"No, exactly like a spider."
Shaw had, somehow, managed to fall perfectly into step with him. Unlike their artless landing, Shaw had the ability to move in complete silence.
"Let's have a look at this camp of theirs. Maybe they left something behind."
Shaw drew a single dagger then, his boot knife, using it like a shovel to dig through the sand around the campfire. Little by little, the edge of a page became visible, and then the feathery tips of arrows.
"This," Shaw said, holding up a brightly colored arrow, "is worrisome."
"Why? It's just an arrow. Looks completely normal."
"This fletching."
He held the arrow close to his eye, then examined it from several different angles.
"I've seen modified fletching like this before. We're on the right track."
He handed Flynn the arrow, and then fished out the piece of parchment covered by the sand.
"Here, put these in your pouch," Shaw directed.
"What? Why? Why me?"
"Yours is drier. Just do it, Fairwind. I need to look around more. Get those back to the ship and be careful. I want to spend time with those papers later."
"All right, but only because you asked so sweetly." He nearly dropped the arrow, then carefully tucked it under his arm. The notes were trickier, but he folded them gently and slid the bundle into the leather satchel hanging off his belt. Flynn left Shaw playing in the sand with a huff. His entire body ached from being tossed like a rag doll during the storm, and he hadn't managed to get 3 hours of unbroken sleep in days. Whenever they seemed free of the magic squalls, trailing them across the water, another one caught them from the side or head on. Maybe before they pushed north he could grab a minute or two of shut-eye and swig or 12 of rum. Naylor sat with his legs dangling over the railing, eyeing the horizon with his looking-glass, while Melly, Grigsby, and 2 gunner brothers called Harmon and Seward handed down a crate of salted cod, plopping it down on shore. "I wouldn't," Flynn said, accepting a helping hoisting hand from Naylor as he came back aboard, scampering up the rope ladder. "Our cheerful master of ceremonies wants us back in the water quick as you please." A general groan came from the crew. He paused, deciding his much-needed date with a bed and a bottle could wait a moment. That grumbling and moaning from a crew, now just a scratch, could easily deepen into a festering wound. Now, he said, clapping Naylor on the back. "We won't weigh anchor far from here, and then you can eat as much cod and chug as much grog as you'd like. We've survived the worst bits, lads and ladies, so pull up your bloomers and let's hop to it. Melly, can you, tide sage us out of here?" Melly made her way grumpily back up the rope ladder. Her crown of braids had been undone by the storm, reddish hair hanging limp around her shoulders.
Aye, sir. Tide's going out, and the waves are nice and gentle.
Excellent! See? Good news! Fortune doesn't favor the bold, it favors the patient. Now to see about that Rumsey slumber.
Captain! In the trees! More of those trolls!
Naylor flailed, letting out 3 short whistles. Flynn ran to the man's side, ripping the spyglass out of his hand and searching the edge of the jungle. Just as he said, a squad of well-armored trolls waited just inside the tree line, a single gold boot visible and reflecting the cloud-washed sun.
Hey!
Naylor shouted down to Shaw. The spymaster gained his feet, but the trolls had already begun streaming out of the jungle, golden swords flashing. A line of archers emerged, readying their bows.
They're back! They're back, and they brought friends!
Run out the guns! Flynn thundered. Rifles loaded and ready to fire! Now! 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 Enough of the crew remained aboard to snap into swift action. Naylor, Grigsby, and the Coultieran brothers shoved Melly aside, fetching rifles from the crates stacked and lashed near the mainmast. Flynn reacted with the practiced, memorized speed of a lifelong sailor, rushing below deck to fetch a fresh barrel of powder for the rifles, while the gunners busied themselves on the gallery. Crash, crash, squeak! Came the heartening sound of the 6-pounders being wheeled out and aimed, and the rhythmic call and response as the guns were loaded, the powder rammed down the barrel and the wadding after. Then came the ball. Captain, do we fire? Flynn couldn't be sure who even asked, but as he cracked open the powder barrel and looked out to the shore, he found Matthias Shaw had drawn his daggers. The man faced impossible odds. Nobody could stand alone against that many soldiers and archers, let alone with only 2 measly daggers. The trolls charging him were not the white and black-clad sort they had seen before. The intricate golden armor and tactics gave them away as royal guards. They spotted Shaw and, worse, the ship. Flynn swore. They had been made. He watched, heart pounding, as Shaw lifted his daggers, and then carefully, obviously placed them down on the sand. Surrendering? Flynn whispered. He wouldn't have it. That was their man down there, and he didn't care how many trolls he had to fire on to save him. He lifted his hand, ready to give the order to fire, but Matthias turned his back on the trolls pelting toward him, seemingly impervious to their war cries. Run, he said, clear as a bell. Leave Zandalar, Flynn. Run!
Do we fire, sir?
Naylor trembled, itchy.
No, don't fire!
Flynn pried himself away from the powder keg, finding Melly already dashing up toward the wheel.
Do it, Melly,
he said, deadly serious.
Get us out of here! But Shaw, he knows what he's doing. We have to trust him on that. We have to trust our own.
As much as I'd like to wring his neck right now, that is.
Go!
The first Zandalari arrow struck the railing inches from Naylor's arm. The others began to fall quickly after that, peppering the deck like a volley of winter hail. Melly stood tall behind the wheel, eyes closed, hands out before her, as she conducted the waves like they were an orchestra, and not surf and spray. Flynn didn't dare break her concentration, dodging each arrow as it whistled down toward him. It was agony, leaving a man behind. They had spent countless hours together aboard the bold Arva, not just for sharing strategies, but sharing their lives. True, Flynn had been tipsy for some of the more personal confessions, but he couldn't remember the last time he had told anyone about his mother. She was a sacred memory, a trove he always left buried. No X marked the spot, because he never acknowledged her existence to anyone. But somehow, Shaw had gotten it out of him. Maybe it was Shaw's quiet listening nature, or maybe Flynn had grown to trust him. Shaw didn't flinch at all until he got to the part where she was hanged. A thief and a scoundrel, and the woman he admired most in the whole world, Lyra Fairwind. A thief, definitely. A scoundrel, maybe. A loving mother? Absolutely. And now Fairwind was leaving that man behind, The only man in the world who knew about his mother, who listened, and knew when exactly to give just that little wince of solidarity. That man gone. The cannons and guns were loaded. They could fire, but Shaw had surrendered and given his order. He remembered the spymaster's words. An act of aggression. Surely opening fire on the Zandalari would only make things worse, and potentially put Shaw's life in danger. Flynn twitched, desperate to pull his blunderbuss and show the trolls what happened when they advanced on his crew. But the bold Arva began to slide slowly but surely back out toward the lanes. The outgoing tide caught them, just as Melly predicted, and with the bowsprit angled north, they floated steadily away from the beach and toward the river pouring out into the sea. They picked up speed, and Flynn ran to the railing, clutching it while Shaw became smaller and smaller, farther and farther away. No cheer went up from the crew. No one spoke a word. Matthias Shaw was gone. Chapter 18, Tirigard Sound. Jaina had hosted tense dinners before, but this one was swiftly climbing to the top of the list. A small dining room abutted the grand hall, where the Proudmoors kept their extensive collection of maps, charts, seafaring gizmos, and nautical artifacts. That long gallery was decorated from floor to ceiling with oil paintings of the Proudmoor family, extended family, and beloved friends. A striking portrait of King Anduin Rhin was among them. Not included, however, were paintings of her illustrious dinner guests. Illyria Windrunner picked listlessly at her food, spending more time spinning her wine goblet than drinking it. Despite this, a fleet of servants brought in course after course, prolonging Jaina's torment by refusing to just skip to dessert. Instead, she, Illyria Windrunner, Lord Commander Terralion, and Jaina's mother, Catherine, endured an appetizer course of blood sausage and roasted peppers on toast, followed by a savory pie, glistening with honey, nearly rupturing its crust from the sheer amount of fragrant boar sizzling within. Wow. Currently, Jaina watched the High Exarch wolf down a monumental pile of grilled fish. While Illyria's approach was to eat nothing, Terralion instead kept his mouth as full as possible, perhaps giving him an excuse to avoid conversation. They had come at Anduin's behest, charged with concocting a secondary plan should Matthias Shaw find nothing on the Zandalari coast.
I hear Hackney has whipped up a scrumptious ravenberry tart for dessert,
Catherine Proudmoor announced in a painfully sing-song voice, one Jaina only heard when her mother was nearing the end of her patience. Jaina had to admire her mother's tenacity, her uncanny ability to weather even the most awkward supper with absolute poise.
That is very thoughtful, but I fear it will be impossible for me to partake,
Illyria murmured.
I could not possibly eat another bite.
Jaina told herself not to drink too deeply of the excellent wine, even if it was tempting. She longed to return to the strategy hall, to stand among the paintings and brass compasses, and study her revolving map of Azeroth. Wherever they had searched for Sylvanas, a blue pin pierced the leather. When they at last found her, Jaina planned to drive a dagger into the spot. But her mother insisted on being a good host, and that meant detaining them with this exorbitant, unending feast. At least if Anduin or Greymane had been there, the conversation might be light enough to enjoy. Terralion and Illyria undoubtedly detected Jaina's dislike of their methods, the manner in which they had tortured first an apothecary and then a smuggler for vital information. It was vital, Jaina, vital. Do not let your squeamishness cost us the goal. She caught herself glaring at Illyria Windrunner. Once Jaina had held nothing but pure admiration for the ranger. Now, however, with Illyria infested with the void, Jaina held her actions and her words to a higher level of scrutiny. Was it Illyria speaking to her now, lying about her full stomach, or some twisted monstrosity from the void? Did she sit there, still as a statue, while her mind worked hard, churning with dark machinations? After all, Queen Azshara was still missing after N'Zoth's defeat, last seen escaping in a portal made from the void. Perhaps Illyria knew where the dangerous queen had gone. N'Zoth might be defeated, but many servants of the void remained, and they too might seek to overtake Azeroth as the Corruptor had. Would Illyria even know if she had passed the point of no return? How did one separate thought from the void's twisted influence? "Well," Catherine chirped, resplendent in a deep purple frock, embellished with gold admiral's fringe on the shoulders. Her iron-grey hair had been coiffed into a sleek dome on her head. "I think more wine would suit us all, wouldn't it? Yes, much more wine." "My lady!" The double doors leading into the dining room from the gallery were already open, flanked by 2 Proudmoore guards wielding pikes. Yet a third guard slid into the room, panting, his held crooked as he struggled to catch his breath. "By wind and sea, speak, Cormory," Catherine Proudmoore demanded, in her precise, cool way, a former admiral even at rest. She stood along with Jaina, alarmed at the intrusion. "What's the matter with you?" "They took him!" Of all the people Jaina expected to come careening into her family keep, Flynn Fairwind was not one of them. But there he was, the sea dog, shoving Cormory aside and barely making it to the dining table. "Who did they take?" Jaina asked, abandoning her wine and her plate to go to Fairwind's side. Illyria and Terralion joined, and soon all 4 of them stood circling the man, who looked as if the sea had ravished him for months. A fine crust of salt cracked across his forehead, his swarthy skin blistering with sunburn, his auburn hair tumbled out of its ribbons in a snarl. "We sailed!" He heaved again for breath. One of the servants appeared, handing him a glass of water. He knocked it away and grabbed the wine bottle off the table, swinging for 10 unbroken seconds. "We sailed as fast as we could, back through the storm. Melly damn near killed herself, but she knew this route so well, said it was the best port to take us." "Is Melly all right? What is going on?" Catherine pressed, snatching the bottle out of his hand. "Here, Flynn, sit," Jaina told him, gently easing him into the chair Illyria had vacated. "Try to calm down, catch your breath, and tell us exactly what happened. Who is gone?" "It's Shaw. They took him. The Zandalari trolls caught us. They saw our ship, and Shaw was still on shore." He pulled out a satchel on his belt, unhooking it with a grunt, before spilling the contents across the dinner table, spoiling Hackney's platter of tenderloin with a spiced duxelle. That didn't bother Fairwind, who began shoveling food into his mouth with more gusto than Terralion, almost choking himself as he chewed. "This arrow." Terralion held up one of the items from Fairwind's pouch. At once the Lord Commander's brow darkened, his lips turning into a firm line. "I've seen these before. This fletching. These are the arrows we found in Shaw's spies." "It's all right," Jaina said, still trying to soothe Fairwind. His eyes bulged, red with tears and sunburn, as he reached for the potatoes. "Matthias Shaw is a high-ranking member of the Alliance forces. If they took him prisoner, then Queen Talanji will not execute him without cause." "Read," he stammered around his food. "Read these." He shoved the bits of curled and bleached paper toward Illyria. "Because I can't." She deftly picked one up with a thumb and a forefinger.
I somewhat doubt these trolls would communicate to one another in Thalassian. These are valuable pieces of evidence he has brought us, proof that the Dark Rangers are indeed infiltrating Zandalar.
Then it's true, Jaina breathed. Thalassian, the language of the High and Blood Elves.
Notes on the region,
Illyria continued, flipping through the various messages.
Troop movements, patrol routes. Nothing that might tell us what they want on the island.
But proof enough that the Dark Rangers are there, Terralion interrupted. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose with irritation. We should have acted sooner. Sylvanas could be in Zuldazar right now. She could be conspiring with the trolls. Jaina sensed the conversation moving far beyond her control. Of course, she wanted to find Sylvanas. Of course, these clues must be taken into consideration. But she heard the far-off drums of war echoing in Terralion's voice. His anger, his frustration, was completely justified. But she worried now what that justification might become. Anduin had already sent his sly messenger Valera Sanguinar to the one member of the Horde he unfailingly trusted, Bane Bloodhoof, questioning whether they might have spotted Sylvanas in Zandalari lands. Carefully he prodded, mentioning only that Dark Rangers had been seen departing the Eastern Kingdoms and sailing in that direction. But Bane Bloodhoof's response had been swift and certain. They had no knowledge of Sylvanas hiding anywhere in Zandalar. Perhaps it was naive of Anduin to believe him, but Jaina knew Bane well too. There would be no reason for him to lie. Bane wanted Sylvanas captured, and tried as much as they did.
I will take these missives to the king, Illyria stated, gathering up the bits of parchment. He must be informed at once, and a new strategy approved. If the Horde is harboring Sylvanas on Zandalar, then we must be quick and quiet. The cunning blade never seen, and only later felt.
No. Even Fairwind fell silent at Jaina's single word. The room stilled. Illyria gazing into Jaina's eyes with ill-concealed disdain.
You disagree that time is of the essence? The time for action is now!
The timbre of her voice changed. Jaina heard her mother gasp and draw back. The pale blue light in Illyria's eyes flamed higher, a dark nimbus of purple vapor surrounding the ranger's body. Jaina could lose her temper too. She could shout and rail and teleport Illyria to the very top of Mount Neverest. But she did not. Jaina breathed in, feeling ice gather on her tongue. No magic. Breathe.
I disagree with your conclusions,
Jaina replied, voice hardly above a whisper.
Think, Illyria. Think carefully. Shaw and Fairwind were already seen by the Zandalari, so we can assume they were also identified. Zandalar will be expecting more Alliance soldiers on their doorstep. Do not reward their paranoia. Do not add fuel to an already kindling fire. I beg of you. Do not risk the treaty we worked so hard to achieve.
Then what do you suggest? Terralion still held the Zandalari arrow with Dark Ranger fletching. The sharp end pointed toward her. His other hand went to Illyria's, and Jaina saw him give a tight squeeze.
That we put our trust in that very same treaty,
Jaina murmured. An idea formed in her head, her gaze fixed on Fairwind and his stunned expression, wind-chapped lips hanging open.
All I beg of you is time. Time to let me try this one last thing. If this fails, then perhaps you are right, Illyria. Perhaps then we must become the Blade.
Chapter 19 Orgrimmar. Thrall stared in dumb wonderment at the message G. Firepaw had just passed into his hands. I was only gone for 2 days, Thrall muttered. Clearly I missed something. G vented a tired laugh. Forgive me for ambushing you this soon after your return, Thrall, but I believe the urgency demanded your immediate attention. The Pandaren bowed, righting himself with a less tired and more mischievous smile. That, and I wanted to see your reaction. Together they walked the long path down from the tallest heights of Orgrimmar to the seat of the council, Gromash Hold. While they waited for the elevator that would take them to the ground level of the city, G bounced his fingers impatiently off his own belly, one eye turned towards Thrall. Well, he pressed, what do you make of it? I cannot say it is surprising. Thrall scanned the message again, feeling the exhausted headache pinching the back of his scalp sharpen. While it was an invitation to meet with the King of Stormwind, the letter was written in Jaina's distinctive hand. The fact did not go unnoticed, and it must be taken for what it was, a brazen attempt to manipulate him with their friendship. He did not begrudge it. If he needed a favor from the Alliance, he might do exactly the same. She opened with general, polite introductions to the council, and addressed the missive to them as a collective, but one section in particular was just for him.
Please, Thrall, if ever you valued our friendship, then meet with King Anduin and myself. I share with you now sensitive Alliance intelligence, in the hope that you will see it not only as a gesture of goodwill, but as a call to action.
I had hoped to resolve the unrest in Zandalar before the Alliance could learn of it, he finally answered the curious Pandaren. But this...
Dark Rangers prowl the jungles of Zandalar, and our spy master is now in the custody of Queen Talanji. Some among us believe that the Zandalari Queen may be conspiring with Sylvanas. If this is so, I refuse to believe you had knowledge of it. Meet with us, old friend, and help me protect this fledgling armistice. It feels as if it might be torn to shreds before the ink has even dried on the page.
This cannot be ignored. Thrall folded the message and tucked it into his belt for safekeeping. There was no need to read it again. He had already made up his mind. May I attend the meeting? Thrall lifted a brow. You want to come? The letter was addressed to us all. Besides, when lightning strikes the wrong tree, the whole forest burns, G replied, following Thrall out onto the road after the elevator stopped at the bottom. Zandalar is the tree. These dark rumors are the lightning. Perhaps our monk's wisdom might stem the blaze. These negotiations will require a delicate touch, G, and your wisdom generally involves acting as swiftly as possible, Thrall said. But then, I suppose going at all would be action. You know, agreeing to this might be unpopular with the rest of the council. The monk tugged at his long black beard. With the hour very late, the streets of Orgrimmar stood nearly empty, a full moon lighting their path as vividly as any torch. That is so, G agreed. But popular or not, the Horde's previous rogue war chief almost cost my people the soul of their homeland, so you will of course forgive my insistence. Hellscream. Thrall had defeated Garrosh Hellscream in a Mak'gora, justice for his dizzying list of crimes. Hellscream's lust for power had led to him using an old god's heart to gain unnatural strength, making him an enemy of not just the Pandaren and the Alliance, but the Horde as well. The Veil of Eternal Blossoms has nearly healed, G concluded. But the Pandaren will forever wear the scars of Hellscream's cruelty. Thrall glanced down at the stout monk master, finding a familiar tenacity in the Pandaran's eyes. He had seen that same pain, that same determination, in the eyes of Tyrande Whisperwind. The burning of Teldrassil, the destruction of the Veil of Eternal Blossoms. It was all so pointlessly selfish and callous. Woes upon woes, Thrall sighed. Trouble heaped upon trouble. The Pandaren simply made a soft sound of confusion. A few peons stumbling home drunk from the tavern wandered by Gromash Hold, their laughter echoing off the tall, spiked towers of the city. Work, 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 work. 4 orcish sentinels stood guard, braziers burning outside to aid their watch. The reports from our ambassador in Zandalar are bleak, G. Ah, young Zakan. Chieftain Rokan departed for Zandalar yesterday. He was growing concerned about the boy. Thrall let G push ahead and into the hold. The Queen is being overrun with rebels opposing her rule. The Zanchuli Council is deadlocked, more assassination attempts have been made, and now the Alliance wishes to confer with us. I cannot help but think all of these things are connected. The Pandaren paused, twirling his beard with 2 fingers. Raised voices drifted to them through the curtain, cutting off the main rotunda of the hold from view. Thrall dreaded what came next. This is what it means to be just one voice among many. These were your conditions to return and live among the Horde again. The compromises, the arguments, the delegating. We should go in, Thrall murmured. We did walk all this way. Why hesitate? Thrall might have bored him with a list long enough to fill many hours. Instead, he simply said, I am tired, G, and I feel so very old. The Pandaren snorted and tossed his beard over one shoulder. We have a saying where I grew up in Wusong Village. The oldest ginger is the most pungent. Thrall pulled the leather curtain aside. What an interesting way of telling me I smell. At last, there you are. Lorthamar stood at their arrival, as did all those who had been in conference with him. Where are Bane and Kalia? Hurry now and tell us what you make of this request from the Alliance. They will be here soon to describe our meeting with the Night Elves. Tugging the message from his belt, Thrall felt the weight of their expectations fall directly on him. It was good that G. Firepaw had managed to make him laugh, easing the burden of what might come next. Lorthamar, Thalystra, Gazlo, and Lillian Voss crowded toward him. As G had informed him, Rokan was absent, and Kalia, Menethil, and Bane Bloodhoof had not yet returned to the hold. Before Thrall could continue, G. Firepaw coughed loudly into his furry fist. As for the message, we will go. The word from Zandalar is dire. We know this. The Alliance knows this, and it is our duty to act. If we ignore their summons, then why did we sign a treaty in the first place? He was grateful to his friend for taking the arrow. The last thing Thrall wanted was to appear more like a war chief, and less like a single, equal member of the council. He supported G's speech by simply standing at his side, still and tall, nodding occasionally to express his agreement. Still, First Arcanist Thalystra narrowed her eyes at them both.
Thrall, what are your thoughts?
G is right. I'd hoped to put out the fires in Zandalar before the Alliance noticed, but it appears the conflict has grown too obvious to hide. I know Jaina Proudmoore well. She would not go to these lengths lightly. But Dark Rangers, Lorthamar scoffed, crossing his arms across his red tunic chased in gold. This sounds far-fetched, does it not? It sounds to me like they got their man arrested for trespassing, and now they want our help freeing him. They are abusing our civility. Thrall had not considered that, but he shook his head. I have no intention of freeing their spy. I go to protect Zandalar. That is my only intent. If the Alliance decides Dark Rangers are working with Queen Talanji, then they will start another war. But I would have a difficult time blaming them. How could they think that? We have not been kind to Sylvanas' loyalists, Lorthamar spat. We know that, Thrall told him calmly. But the Alliance does not. What must our turmoil look like to them? No, I will assuage their fears, and what is more, I will listen.
Listen? Sounds boring. How about you tell those pesky humans to stay off our lands? Last time I checked, a treaty wasn't just a bunch of gentle suggestions.
The trade prince Gazlo, head just slightly taller than the first arcanist's knee, made his position clear.
I say forget it. They can have their spy back when they give us something first.
Thrall breathed in sharply through his nose, but G. Firepaw cut in, taking the tiniest step forward to place himself between the orc and the rest of the council. They will give us something. They will give us their knowledge. Thrall speaks true. Whatever we learn, we will use it to protect Zandalar. Lorthamar, stewing over it all, tapped his boot impatiently. He tossed up his hands in frustration and gestured to Thalysra. Might you conjure them a portal to Zandalar, let them go to this meeting and question the Alliance for information? In truth, I want to know more of these Dark Rangers. If by chance Sylvanas truly is in Zandalar, then we could have her in our snare tomorrow.
Do it.
Lillian Voss, who was still finding her footing at the meetings and rarely spoke, sounded unusually confident.
Any chance we have to capture the Banshee Queen cannot be wasted.
Kiro, the diminutive fox-like creature draped in beads and leather, warmed his paws at the central brazier. Just like Lillian, he was still finding his place among the council. The Valpyra were still a new addition to the Horde.
While many of us have left Zandalar, it is still our home. If it is sick with treachery, I would see it healed.
Optimism from Lorthamar, decisiveness from Lillian, and now the Valpyra leadership agreed too. Thrall had no idea where Sylvanas might be, but if the Alliance had information that would lead them to her, then all the better. Only Gazlo remained unsure, but his single neigh could not overrule the decision. But it mattered to Thrall that they reach a consensus. He stared at the goblin, patient yet impatient, a familiar knot of anxiety building in his stomach. Surviving as many battles, cataclysms, earth-shaking disasters, and invasions as he had, Thrall had cultivated a honed warrior's instinct for danger. Time is of the essence, his senses screamed at him. But consensus mattered. The council mattered. Gazlo mattered.
Oh, fine, what the hell?
The goblin rolled his eyes, waving Thrall away.
Just capture Sylvanas, we can all shut up about her already and get back to worrying about Horde problems. Our problems. Goblin problems. He winked. Obviously.
Thalysra tried to hide her amused smile, but Thrall noticed it. Once she had it back under control, the portal opened, slashing itself across Gazlo's unimpressed grimace. On the other side, a ship in the middle of a strait waited, a small patch of calm at the center of a brewing storm. Thrall did not like to be kept waiting, but his companion, G. Firepaw, liked it even less. The restless Pandaren stood at the edge of the ship without sails, a bobbing wreck left afloat in the waters between the Eastern Kingdoms and Zandalar. Without a crew, without any means of transporting itself, it felt like the immense skeleton of some long-dead ocean beast. Scraps of rigging hung from the masts, like dried entrails left to flap in the breeze. The deck as bleached as a desert corpse. Quite the storm. G pointed to the west, where blackened thunderheads hung low and threatening over the sea. The waves crashing below surged high enough to tickle the bottoms of the clouds. Thrall frowned. Yet it isn't moving. G glanced up at him. Storms move. That looks more like a wall to me. Perhaps we should be glad. This old hulk wouldn't survive a sun shower, let alone whatever that is. The Pandaren shuddered. Just add it to the list.
The list?
Of curiosities and coincidences that must be explained, G replied with a growl. Of links that make up a chain we cannot yet see the end of. There was no arguing with that.
I had at least hoped to better understand the disruption in the spirit realm, to remove one link from that infernal chain, but the Night Elves were not willing to lend us a single priestess, or even discuss the nature of the disturbance.
Squinting toward the storm clouds, G clucked his tongue with disappointment. Then you learned nothing in Nordrasil.
I wouldn't say that.
The mage's portal pulled at the air around them, before a reverberating crack split the silence on that forlorn stretch of ocean. G Firepaw whirled around with his hands up, his fighter's stance at the ready, but Thrall took his time, staring for a moment longer at the band of shadowy purple clouds wrapping around Zandalar like a bruised fist. Footsteps, soft ones, then a louder pair clad in armor. Just as Jaina had promised, only two had come. Thrall turned to face them, wearing a thin smile.
No ambush? Thrall said by way of greeting. Shame. It's a damn good place for one.
Jaina Proudmoore, redeemed pride of Kultiris, blonde and white hair braided over one shoulder, her crystal-topped staff aimed placidly at the deck, gained her feet on the gently rocking ship without a hitch. One might conclude she had sea legs while still in the womb. I'm full of surprises today, Thrall, she replied, echoing his expression. She dropped a leather satchel on the ground. But not that kind. Thank you for coming. The King of Stormwind, by contrast, did not seem so at ease on the ship. His initial steps out of the portal wobbly before he planted himself with the expected dignity of a royal. His skin looked worn and blue around the eyes, exhausted smudges painted beneath. Thrall knew that look well, had experienced it himself many times, the sleepless, sallow ravages of leadership. It had been mere months since he had last clapped eyes on the King of Stormwind, yet he seemed to have aged a full year. G Firepaw. Jaina lifted a brow.
Greetings, Lord Admiral, Your Majesty. The Pandaren bowed. Disappointing that we meet under such unhappy circumstances.
Unhappy isn't the half of it, the king muttered. Before he could say more, Thrall put up his hand, interrupting.
There is something you should know. If there are to be no great secrets between us, if we are to trust, then I should tell you that I met with Tyrande and Malfurion.
Jaina and Anduin stared at him, both in stunned silence. Oh, was all Jaina could muster. Thrall bowed his head, ruffling the hair at his nape in frustration.
It did not go well. I tried to put forward an apology from the Horde, but they did not accept it. They are interested only in revenge against Windrunner.
That is also foremost on our minds, Anduin replied, impatient. He sliced his hands across the air between them. Let us cut to the chase, shall we? Jaina reached into the pack she had dropped, producing an arrow that looked to be of Zandalari make and colors, and several scraps of parchment. Crossing the narrow distance between them, she handed the arrow to G and the papers to Thrall, then returned to Anduin's side. We intercepted members of the Horde aiding a dark ranger called Vizerin. She took passage from Faldir's Cove to Zandalar, warning of the storms you now see on the horizon, which speaks to organization, a plan. My spymaster and Lord Commander Terrelion are also confident that the arrow you hold has been fletched by dark rangers. Anduin barreled on. To business. Thrall approved. It appears quite different from the fletching you see on the average Zandalari arrow. We have many left over from the war for comparison. Thrall had begun perusing the notes, but shifted his gaze to the king at that.
The messages say I can read them, Thrall growled, silencing him.
and reading them filled his heart with dread. His warrior's senses prickled along the back of his neck, more links to add to that chain. This was bad. It was bad for the Horde, but worse for Talanji. There was no mistaking the script, the language, the content. Dark Rangers had written those notes, and while Thrall was not intensely familiar with the fletching those archers used, he saw no reason to doubt the accusation. The letters themselves were damning enough. "Are you betraying us?" Anduin's voice hit the deck with the weight of an anchor. The words lingered, sea winds whistling between them for an agonizing moment that stretched on until the king broke it again. "Is Sylvanas Windrunner seeking refuge on Zandalar? I have come for answers, Thrall, and I will have them." Beside him, G. Firepaw straightened, huffing with outrage. "There is no love left for Sylvanas Windrunner among our Horde. Only hatred. No conspiracy exists to shelter her. Bane Bloodhoof would not abide such a gutless plot, and neither would I. Fires burn in the jungles outside Dazar'alor." Thrall began softly, his voice rising word by word as he discovered in that moment the true depth of the shadows spreading around Talanji. "Rebels have been assaulting the palace, attempting to assassinate the queen, and now burning down lower shrines all over Zuldazar and Nazmir. Her council does nothing, and the queen refuses to set aside old vendettas and ask for our help." He saw the briefest flicker of relief pass across the human king's face. Thrall understood that to other humans, Rin was said to be pleasing-looking, but to the orc, Anduin simply looked like a small pink boy swallowed by clunky armor. At least the small pink boy had the grace to nod and accept his words. Jaina, however, gave no hint of her feelings. "Why?" she asked. "Why what?" "Why won't she ask you for your help? She agreed to join the Horde ages ago." Thrall sighed, holding her gaze and waiting until memory and pain brought wisdom. "You know why." Jaina looked down at her feet. "I see." "Are we to believe them?" Anduin asked her, not in a whisper. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I think we are. What he says is true. Bane Bloodhoof would rather die than be part of some plan to hide and help Sylvanas. We must find these Dark Rangers and make sense of their being on Zandalar. Whatever the reason, it cannot be good." "It appears the lightning has already struck," G murmured quietly. Thrall shut his eyes tight. It had indeed. A wave of hopelessness nearly overcame him, but he stood tall. All was not lost yet. They still had Zakan, embedded with the queen and earning her favor. They now knew better what they were facing. A picture began to form in his mind, hazy and shaky, but still there, an image of Queen Talanji. She was young and brash, vulnerable because of her inexperience and her isolation, crippled by the grudge she held against Jaina, the perfect target for someone seeking to unseat a queen. But why? What did Talanji possess that the Dark Rangers or Sylvanas might want? Without asking, Thrall stuffed their evidence into his pack. Anduin raised a brow but said nothing. No doubt the Alliance spies had made copies of the missives. It was what Thrall would do. "I will go to Dazar'alor myself." Thrall looked to first Anduin, then Jaina. "We have tried the careful approach, the quill and soft words." He gave a single grave nod. "Now it is time for the hammer and fist." "There is also the matter of our spy master," Anduin replied. The wreck seesawed harder from side to side, but the king managed to stay upright. "While he trespassed on Zandalari shores, he was not there without cause. His mission brought us these indelible clues, proof that Sylvanas or her agents have infiltrated the continent. We are of course willing to use all accepted diplomatic channels to recover him. We only ask that he is not harmed until order is restored to the throne of Zandalar. The Alliance recognizes this was badly done, that we should have brought our suspicions to you directly, and not sought to position our spies in your territory. G. Firepaw rumbled with appreciation. That is well spoken, your majesty, and the Horde Council can assure you that we do not execute prisoners without a trial. The King of Stormwind narrowed his eyes. We would like to have him returned, soon. The boat rocked again, hard, and Thrall would have toppled over if not for G. Firepaw. The monk's superior balance kept him upright, and he caught the orc before he could tumble overboard. Jaina reached for Anduin, steadying him. Give me 2 days, Thrall said, struggling to stand with stronger and stronger waves battering the wreck. I will see about your spy, and I will take these matters to the Queen herself. Just as you said, King Anduin, there will be answers. If we survive to see the next 2 days. G had turned back to face Zandalar and the ring of storms shrouding it. Those storms had spread, or at least a fragment had, a cluster of angry clouds racing toward them, bringing the misty grey fringe below that signaled rain. Thrall could not believe the size of the waves gathering. That storm nearly killed Fairwind, he heard Jaina hiss. 3 times. A portal, Jaina, quickly, the king demanded. Thrall whirled to face them, taking a few precarious strides forward. 2 days. Do not invade before then. Trust that we will see to Zandalar. Trust! Ostensibly, he asked them both, but he looked to Jaina. Granted! King Anduin shouted. The storm rushed upon them with unnatural speed, hurling the wreck from side to side, tossing it like a piece of driftwood. 2 days, Thrall, but we cannot afford to lose the Banshee Queen's trail. Thrall! G pointed frantically to the thunderous waves, the drummings of the rain like a hail of arrows upon the sea. Thrall, we are stranded! Jaina! She had already begun channeling her magic, opening a portal to whisk herself and the king to safety, but she heard him above the din of the storm and turned, her blonde halo of hair stirred by the shock of winds from the west. Without another word she swiveled, the portal she had been making for herself and Anduin sputtering out into a single blue sparkle. Where? She screamed. The shore, Thrall thundered, cupping his hands round his mouth. Dazara Lore! The portal opened, a shimmering mirage of the Golden City there in its depths. Thrall grabbed G and tossed him inside, then watched the mage cling to her king before he too escaped the murderous sea. The wreck disappearing from under him as they plunged toward Zandalar.